Hey guys, Pastor Ben here with another review and reflection. Today I want to talk about The Long Winter by Laura Ingalls Wilder. This is one of the books. This is book number 6 in the Little House on the Prairie series with the wonderful illustrations by Garth Williams as well. I've been reading over the years through this series with the girls and just finished reading this book the other night. So this is a really interesting one for me because I grew up reading, Little House on the Prairie, but we hadn't read all of the books. And so the books we've read so far with the girls are ones that I had read as a kid growing up myself. But this was one that I had never read before. So going through it with the girls was a chance for me to read it for the first time as well. And I really enjoyed it. The book is, I don't think there's any spoilers in this, it's about a really long winter. This is taking place as the Ingalls girls, Mary and Laura are kind of in their older teenage years. Carrie's like 10 or 11 years old. Grace is a toddler. And they're living on the Dakota prairies as a family. And the story begins kind of at the end of summer, beginning of fall. And they are told by these American Indians that they should be braced for this terrible winter. Basically, there's kind of this cycle on the prairie where every 50 years, there's this really terrible winter that lasts for 7 months. And people aren't sure what to make of it, but sure enough, they're right. And these blizzards start coming in at the end of October and continue on through the end of April. We actually started reading this right at the beginning of our winter and kind of finished it this other night as we're coming into spring. Fortunately, it wasn't a 7-month winter of blizzards, but that did make art imitating life a little bit real for us. But this book is basically Laura's account of what that winter was like. The family ends up moving into town and just talks about all the things that they do to survive the winter, all of the hardships that they had, and is a really interesting kind of account of that. So as with all of the Little House on the Prairie books, there are certain things that happen throughout the story, but it's not plot driven. It's really character driven, and it's really carried by Laura Ingalls Wilder's wonderful descriptions of just everyday life. When she's describing how they're cooking something, or Pa doing the chores, or what the scenery is like, or people's interactions. She just you can tell that as a child she had her eyes open to everything, and as a writer looking back as an adult, she's able to kind of bring us back into her experience. And that's the real beauty of the Little House on the Prairie books, is that it puts you right there, and you get to kind of see what life was like on the prairie, on the American frontier, through the eyes of a child. And so this book does that and walks you through some of the challenges that they face just with the natural world. These are like really brutal winters on the Great American Plains. So a lot of it is going to be the type of thing you're familiar with if you've read other books in the series. But there was a few things that stood out to me from this book. So one thing was the way that she ends up kind of walking you through the long winter. I think this is a compliment to say this book felt really long, and not necessarily because it needed to be edited and made shorter or something, but just because when the winter first hits, you're kind of caught up in like the excitement of this, and this is different, and what's this going to be like. But then as things just kind of wind on and on and on and on, you feel that with them, because it is like you're living through it yourself. That's the strength of the book. And so at times what that meant was reading through this, a couple pages a night kind of thing for us over these last several months has felt like a very long process. But I think in a sense that's a testament to the strength of her writing, that it was all well written, it's all well described, but you're walking with the Ingalls family through their challenges. And so that's something that was really well done. One of the things, interestingly, that they end up doing kind of as they're hitting the halfway point or moving beyond that and realizing the trains aren't going to be coming through, and they're just settling in for this long winter, it's not just a fluke kind of thing, is they begin to turn to literature, especially, to help them through that long winter. And I just couldn't help but think what a beautiful picture that was, for someone who's a writer, to be pointing us to that so often in hard times, going back to stories, going back to songs, allowing yourself to be transported somewhere else in the midst of hard things, whether it is a long winter or depression or loss or suffering or conflict or whatever it might be that we're experiencing. That's something that has a lot of power. They're singing songs, they're telling stories, they're reciting poems, and that's something that is kind of this bright light for them in a very dark, long experience. Um, but there was another scene that just stood out to me, and again, this is not a plot-driven book, um, but probably the closest I could get to a spoiler is what I'm about to say. So if you have not read the book and want to experience it all afresh, then pause it here. But if you have read the book, or if you don't care about spoilers, uh, what ends up happening is the town is on the verge of running out of food. No train is able to get through. Their rations are kind of depleting, and they are about out of options. And as the men of the town are talking, they realize that if they don't find some sort of food, then people are going to start starving, right? And this book is again written when Mary and Laura are still at home. They're still girls, although they're entering womanhood. Um, but Almanzo and Royal Wilder are living in town at the same time. And at that point, of course, again, another spoiler thing for later on in the series, Laura's going to end up marrying Almanzo down the road. At this point, there's nothing like that going on. But, we know as readers, Almanzo's going to be her husband. And Almanzo and Royal are kind of involved in this conversation with the men. And someone had heard that there was this farmer 20 miles south of town who had brought in this big harvest of wheat that he was waiting to sell when the spring came. And people realized that's their only hope, is to get that wheat. The problem is these massive blizzards are coming in every day or two, and it's impossible to navigate. All the landmarks are obscured, and so to just find this farmer, and no one knows exactly where he is, it's just a rumor about 20 miles south of town, so they don't know exactly where. The thought of going out and finding that wheat, trying to buy it and bring it back, is a really daunting task, and is an undertaking that could easily result in someone's death if they get caught in these storms. And so when that rumor first circulates, we have this scene where Paul is kind of sharing this story with the family, and you can tell he's starting to think, maybe I should go and try and get the wheat, which is exactly the kind of thing that Paul is always doing, right? In the Little House on the Prairie stories, he's pulling his family through. He's taking on the hard task. He's doing the thing that would have seemed impossible, but he's got that frontier grit and he does it. But he's at a very different stage, right? And there's this really kind of striking scene where Ma, it says, it shocks everyone in the room, but Ma basically puts her foot down and says, "No, Charles, you can't do that. You're not the one to do that," kind of thing. And it's a very strange scene because, of course, Ma is very much patient and goes along with what Paul says, but in this case she doesn't. She puts her foot down, and it kind of shocks everybody, but Paul realizes, okay, it's not me. And then we switch scenes, and Almanzo is the one who basically says, "I'm going to go do this. I'm going to go put my life on the line to save the town and save these families," even though he and his brother have the food that they need. And so it's exactly him doing what Paul would have done, but Paul is no longer able to do because he's in a different stage of life. He has different commitments. And so, long story short, Almanzo ends up going out with another young man. They find the farmer, they negotiate, they bring it back. And there's this really kind of touching scene where when all of that is brought back, the people have been without food for so long that they're really weak. And so Paul goes to pick up this 125-pound bag of wheat, which, Paul could do that, but he's so weak that he almost can't, and he's struggling. And it says, Almanzo sees that and is moved with compassion, and he wants to help Paul, but he also recognizes he needs to respect his dignity and not insult him by offering to carry it. So he just kind of is like, "Oh, let me give you a hand, Mr. Ingalls," and just kind of helps him lift it onto his shoulders, and then lets Paul take it across. And there's kind of this scene where it's like we're in Almanzo's eyes and we get to see that happening. And what just struck me, thinking about this and thinking about Laura is, as an author, not only telling us things that she experienced, it is a story. It's not just a biography. It's inspired by the events of her life, but she's looking at this as an author. And I just thought that was just a beautiful scene of like, we know that Almanzo is going to become the new Pa. Laura's going to marry him, and he's going to be the one who's providing and caring for and all of that. He's going to step into those shoes, and we kind of see that happen in this story. Even though he's not yet marrying Laura, Paul is no longer able to do all the things that he was doing, but Almanzo is now acting as the new Paul, and he's doing exactly what Charles Ingalls would have done, and that there is this kind of shift that's taking place for us as we kind of see the young taking over for the old, and yet Almanzo models exactly how that should happen, in that there's no looking down on or despising the older man. In fact, and I won't go into all the details so that there's something for you to explore in the book, but there's kind of this scene after Almanzo brings the wheat back in which Paul really steps up and leads, but it's no longer the leading of just the brute strength or courage. It's him leading with wisdom and discretion. And so there's a kind of shifting of seeing Paul still leading, still serving, but in a different way as he's more mature and as he's older. And then someone like Almanzo stepping into Paul's shoes, doing what the young Charles Ingalls would have done, but doing it with respect for and admiration for the old. So I just thought that was a beautiful kind of picture of the passing of the baton, this picture of what Laura would have experienced, in the shift from father to husband, and kind of this anticipation of the leaving and cleaving that's going on there, as well as just a picture of what all of us are going to experience at different points, which is, taking the baton from someone when we're younger but coming into our maturity, and then at some point passing that on, whether that's in your job, whether that's in your family, whether that's in your community, whatever it might be. At some point, we're all going to find that bag too heavy to lift and need someone else to come along after us. And how do you do that with dignity? And how do you, if you see someone else struggling, allow them to, walk with dignity? And anyways, it was just a great picture of that, I thought. So that was a moment that kind of stood out to me that was very powerful in the book. But there are a lot of things like that jump out. Laura Ingalls is always a good read. And so if you have read any of these books in the past, I think you would really enjoy, and I would encourage you to pick up The Long Winter by Laura Ingalls Wilder.